coming to you live from a beautiful downtown apartment in New Jersey, except neither live nor beautiful nor downtown. Welcome to the 1 Minute Rundown. I'm OC Trinity, your host. Write that down on your hand if you don't trust your head. This time we're running down Devil May Cry. This series is known for a lot of things, for being very hard, for its wisecracking lead character Dante, don't steal his pizza, for his emphasis on both short-range and long-range combat, but most importantly, for making 3D action games fast-paced and cool again. Games like God of War, Bayonetta, and the 3D outings of Castlevania and Ninja Gaiden owe a lot to this series. A typical game saw the lead character jump from chapter to chapter, killing off demons using some combination of swordplay, gunslinging, style, and his own hidden demonic power, frequently all of those at the same time, with the ability to purchase new abilities and items between chapters. I'll review 4 games this episode. Ready? Then let's rock, baby! The first game, compared to the rest of the series, feels similar and yet manages to have a unique feel, in particular because its missions tend to be short, some of which can be reasonably beaten in under 3 minutes. If you got into the series later on, you might also notice that Dante doesn't have nearly the same number of skills. There's only 2 melee weapons you're likely to use a lot, neither of which have many abilities, but at least feel different enough to both be useful, and the long-range weaponry at least does have some good variation. On the other hand, the variety in enemies is very good, many of which require different strategies and weapons to defeat, though it would have been nice to get more variety in the bosses. There's only 5 of them in the game, all of which get fought multiple times. I have a feeling some of the newer fans of this series may dislike this one some because it's not quite as fast-paced as later games, and that's also in part due to a slightly heavier use of puzzles, or at least items to collect and bring back to a specific location. Not bad really, just different. I would have preferred if Dante had more skills at his disposal, but I can still recommend this one to any action game fan. This game seems to be well known as one of the most disappointing sequels ever, to the point that Capcom seems to be steering the series' timeline away from ever referencing it again. But is the game really that bad? Well, it's not one of the worst games I've played or anything, but it's definitely a low point. For one, in sharp contrast to the rest of the series, it feels too easy. There's far too many docile lesser enemies and too many bosses that can be beaten easily by firing guns, dodging a projectile attack, then repeat ad nauseum. Dante doesn't learn any new abilities during the game either, aside from changes to his devil trigger, nor does he gain any new melee weapons, and though swords with different length and power don't count. There is a second player character, Lucia, but she doesn't really play that much differently either. Probably worst out of all these, though, is that the game's speed feels just too slow for an action game. There are far too many fights that just drag on without much ever changing. Admittedly, there are a few things this game does handle better than the first, in particular improved play control and a way to quickly switch your guns, and the game does seem to pick up the slack a little towards the end. Overall, though, all this does is move from failure to mediocrity. Now, if the last game left a sour taste in your mouth, consider this a way to cleanse your palate and enjoy something sweet. We're back to the fast-paced action from before, and Dante's moveset has increased considerably. There are 10 weapons total in this game, 5 devil arms and 5 guns, and each succeeds at feeling completely different than the other. Adding to the mix even further, Dante has 4 different styles that add extra actions depending on whether or not you want to emphasize speed, self-defense, swordplay, or shooting. The only restriction to both of these is that you can only choose 1 style, 2 swords, and 2 guns at a time. You can only switch between chapters or at checkpoints, and a lot of the time it'll come down to which ones you like the most. But the fact is, this also adds a lot, because it means that there are a lot of different ways you can play this game without any way being obviously better than the other. Every one of the chapters manages to have a unique feel, keeping variety very good, so it's a game you'll want to play through, but I will say it's probably the hardest out of this series, so it's not for the faint of patience. But if you truly want to test your skills, this is a great game to do it with. Dante takes a back seat in this game. The star this time is a new character, Nero, who uses only 1 set of weapons, but also has some grappling moves, oddly making a few bosses go slightly into more God of War territory. Dante jumps back into the spotlight for the second half of the game, pretty much playing like he did in DMC3, except being able to carry everything all at once and switch his style at any time. The 2 characters manage to play differently enough, though having a choice of character would have been a nice touch, but they pretty much navigate the same areas and fight a lot of the same enemies, bosses included. In short, Dante's segment is too much a rehash of Nero's, and while the rest of the games had some backtracking too, this doesn't seem to make as much effort to change the landscape much. One other change is that red orbs aren't used for abilities anymore. That's instead form a new currency called Proud Souls, which if nothing else means you can start shopping for items and abilities simultaneously. The level of action is pretty much on the same level as the game before, though that game gets the edge over this one for having better level design, but this one's still one of the better games of its genre. My last episode teased that there was a game still in development the fan base already said they were going to hate. Let's talk about that. The latest game is not a direct sequel, but instead either a side story or a separate continuity, depending on which developer you believe. And sure, there are enough leftover plot lines from the last game that seems questionable, but that's nothing compared to the reception this guy got. Yeah, that guy is supposed to be the new Dante. Now, this video is coming out around 2 months before this game is actually released, so this is mostly going to be speculative. But, you know, that's part of the point here. I mean, we're judging a game based entirely on how it doesn't look like what we're used to. Does that sound familiar? It might, because a lot of people thought DMC4 was going to be a failure of a game specifically because the lead character was not Dante. And whether or not you like Nero doesn't matter, the game did alright for itself. It also doesn't matter because as far as we know, this is not supposed to be the same guy. Example from other media. You know who this is, right? You should, and yet he's considered a different character than this guy, or this one, or that one over here. And of course everyone's so busy hating on the characters look like they haven't paid a lot of attention to how the game itself looks. Previews and videos suggest it's still going to be the same Devil May Cry style we all know and love. For what it's worth, yes, I think Dante's new design is terrible too, but I'm not going to judge a game based solely on that. I'm still going to play it eventually, and I'll enjoy it on its own merits. That's it for Devil May Cry, and you'll be happy to know this is one of the more accessible games I've reviewed so far. There was a recent HD collection that covered the first 3 games, and the 4th being on a modern system is pretty easy to find. There's also a special edition of DMC3 which, among other extras, allows you to play through the game as Virgil. Devil May Cry characters have also appeared in some other games, including Beautiful Joe 2 and Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and I have a feeling Dante will remain a mainstay of Capcom's most notable characters list, though whether or not he'll continue to be probably also depends on how well DMC is received. Look forward to it, and keep on slaying those demons. And don't forget to check back in a couple weeks for the next episode of 1 Minute Rundown, featuring an even more recent series, one that's just released the 5th game in its confusingly numbered trilogy. See you then, and until next time, just know that I should have been the one to fill your dark soul with light! Hey, it looks like the Brotherhood of the Assassins have been here too. These guys are everywhere. I wonder if one of these guys is going to be the character we'll play as in Assassin's Creed 4. Guess not.